There are a few things I enjoy more than talking to Mel Kiper on the radio. Lucky enough to do it with him on ESPN for 6 years, and every year he's good enough to come on and preview the draft with me, and such a great pleasure to bring him back. Hello, Mel.
Andy, what, 1,000+ hours, 8 hours every weekend for a long time at the ESPN Zone? That was a lot. You put up with me. I wore you out a lot of weekends, Andy, along the way.
I know about all your idiosyncrasies. I know about how you used to eat chicken with mustard every week, how you love pumpkin pie with whipped cream. I know all about your family. I've known about your daughter since she was, 7 or 8 years old, and now she's about to be a mom. There's little I don't know about you, Mel.
Stay with Jeremy and Samantha. We were there the whole way. We saw them all grow up, Andy, right before our eyes. And you saw the crazy diet. I had this diet one time. You remember this one?
Yeah.
Where I wouldn't eat any main courses. I would just eat the dessert. I figured if you're going to have the main course, just eat the dessert. So I got that chocolate chip cookie sundae. Remember, came on a skillet down there. So I'd get that. I wouldn't eat anything else but that. I thought that was a great way to diet. What an idiot I am.
Yeah, that was kind of like drafting Heath Schuler. You know, that's.
Yeah. Or Jimmy Clausen, right?
Okay, well, all's fair. You brought that up, so I was gonna talk about how long you've been at ESPN. This is draft. Is it 40 or 41 for you there?
41.
41. Okay, so Jimmy Clausen, we're going back pre-Cam Newton, 12 years ago?
I don't even remember. That's one of the ones I hope to forget.
Okay, Mel said if Jimmy Clausen doesn't become a star, I'll retire. And ESPN said, no, we're not going to let you retire.
I tried, Andy.
I know. You're a man of your word. You're a man of your word. And here's how long ago it was. The player that did become the star, that followed him in the draft, had a great long career, took a team to a Super Bowl, won an MVP, and now he's retired, and you're still at it.
Amazing, Andy, how many years go by. And you think about it, the first year, we were talking to Boomer Esiason on this little, in the middle of the table. It wasn't a mic. It was like just a little box that you could hear Boomer, and we could talk, and he would hear us, and he was talking about how disappointed he was to be a second-round pick when they took 3 players in the first round and then took him in the second. That was the year Steve Young went to the USFL. He would have probably been the number 1 pick overall, would have been, to the Bengals. So it was one of the 84 draft, 83 draft. Is the year I was supposed to be going to work for the Baltimore Colts and Ernie Accorsi when they drafted John Elway, traded him without Ernie's knowledge. The team was moving. Ernie called me and said, hey, I can't bring you in. I said, what do you want me to do, Ern? Keep doing what you're doing. You got a great business going. 4 months later, I get a call from ESPN to go interview for the job. And if I would have gone to work for Ernie and the Colts, I would have never had that job at ESPN. So it's amazing how history could have been rewritten with just a couple things going a little bit differently.
Yeah, but, you could have been the longtime general manager of the Colts, and we could be talking to you about that,
I don't know. Andy,
wasn't a bad.
Would have never met Kim. Would have never had Lauren. So things would have changed dramatically, not for the better, because everything worked out perfectly. And I would have never been doing all those hours of radio with you at the Zone. So worked out beautifully in the end, Andy.
Yeah. Well, look. Here's the thing about where you talk about your start, and there were a couple of guys besides you who were doing draft stuff at the time. One of them was the late Joel Bushbaum, who I remember used to do a lot of radio. How many other guys do you think were doing draft analysis at that time?
Well, Joel was doing it, and I got to know Joel. He did an amazing job. And then he used to be at the draft every year with the Marriott Marquis Grand Ballroom. We would talk for hours. Yeah. So really miss him. And then, of course, I think it was Jerry Jones. I think it was, it was the drugstore list it was called. I remember that back in the day. And then football news and sporting news used to do their types. Howard Baldwin did a lot for the sporting news.
I know Howard.
Howard was. Yep. You know Howard, who was a good friend of ours, and so different people were doing it. I just remember, Joel was the main one. I mean, Joel was just starting out. He started, I think, at 80, 81 in that area. So Joel was the main one, and all thing I can say is, Andy, I was the first one to ever do a 6-round mock draft. So I started this mock draft craziness back in 1979. Actually, I was putting out a report in '79, and I wasn't at ESPN yet.
Right.
But in those reports was a 3-6-round mock, and now it's a mock mania in this world right now.
It is, and that's the point, is that anybody can say, I'm a draft expert. There are, a gazillion of these various networks, and now with the internet, there's various outlets. And what are the qualifications now to become a draft expert? Because
I think it's great, Andy, because you don't need any.
I guess not. Yeah.
I mean, I was just in an era where nobody else I guess nobody else figured it out. I figured it out early. So I jumped in, and everybody jumped on the bandwagon. So I was kind of a trailblazer in that regard. And Curtis Joel did it when nobody else did it, and we were the first one. So then everybody started. I think the '94 draft with the whole Bill Tobin, who that was Mel Kiper. Yeah, my mailman knows more, and he doesn't even have season tickets. You know the whole Bill Tobin rant with Chris Mortensen, the late great Chris Mortensen, who, by the way, I miss every day. I would be talking to more today about everything. But in terms of the draft and the way it evolved, Andy, nobody could have imagined back in the day. I remember sitting on day 2 in the Marriott Marquis Grand Ballroom, just relaxing on day 2, right? It was a really day where not many people, everybody left. Nobody was there except the beat writers and what have you. And Freddie Godelli was sitting there. And I don't remember what year it was. And I said to Freddie, why are you here? You should be back home. He said, I'm here, Mel, scoping this thing out to see what day 2 looks like because we're televising every pick next year. I said, are you kidding me? Every pick? He said, yeah. So from that point on, Andy, we were there for every pick. So to go from where we were, we left the draft. I told you the story. We left the draft in round 2 in 1984 to go to a tractor pull. Who would have ever thought it could have gone from that to this, Andy?
Well, look, I mean, everybody knows who's of a certain age, that there was a period of time that there was no ESPN and there was no live television coverage of the draft. And Chet Simmons, who later became commissioner of the USFL, was the head of ESPN. And he went to Pete Rozelle, the commissioner of the NFL, and he said, I think we want to televise the draft. And Rozelle goes, well, who's going to watch it?
Why would you want to do that?
Yeah, nobody's going to watch.
We're just reading names. It's a non-event, right?
Yeah, and I remember the days I was doing radio before that, and the only way to get draft information was on the wires, as it would come down, in the ticker, AP or UPI, and you'd find out what the picks were. Now, and ESPN found this out the first few years they were televising it. People were calling in sick to work to watch the draft, which was a weekday, right? It started out, it was like a Tuesday, and you'd wrap up Wednesday?
Yeah, Tuesday morning, early Tuesday. I remember being at Calvert Hall in high school, Andy, and I'd listen to the radio, and Charlie Ekman, late great Charlie Ekman, right, who his famous comment was when he was the head coach of the Detroit Pistons, they brought him in, they said, hey, we're going to make a change in your department. He said, I realized for a second I'm the only one in my department, and I was gone. So that's Charlie Ekman, but Charlie would give his sports report every late afternoon drive time, and I would remember listening, and he would give the highlighted players, like the Heisman Trophy winner, this one, that one, obviously with the Baltimore Colts, but that was it. And then you waited till the next morning to get the paper, and you were like looking at all, remember that small little print, team from this, via this team, from that team. It was from them through this, right? From the Rams through the Saints or whatever. So you had to read all that and see who your teams picked. So that was back in the day how you got that information, Andy.
Yeah, it was really remarkable, and what this has all become with everything that we talk about with the draft, starting really. It is year-round, and Dan Patrick made this comment. You mentioned Mort's passing, Chris Mortensen, who was a wonderful guy and great at what he did. He credited 3 people, sadly 2 of them are no longer with us, but 3 people with making the NFL a year-round sport. You were one, John Clayton was another, and Chris Mortensen the third. And what you guys did in pumping out news in their cases and you analyzing the draft, the interest level in the league at this time of year and even through the summer and the post-draft analysis, there's never been anything like it before, and people who are young probably can't imagine that.
No, they really can't. I think you're right. And I think even after the draft, as soon as the draft's over, Andy, May, people say, well, May, you're looking forward to the next year's draft. Todd McShay, who worked with me all those years, and Todd and I talk, even the day after the draft, he's coming out with the mock for next year.
Yeah.
The too early look ahead or whatever it's called. So, again, you're talking about every day of the year, once the draft's over, and then you get the mini camps, but you're looking forward to the next year and what's going to be happening there. So, no, it's never a day, never a month there's not some talk about this, which is, I actually, like I say, going back to 84 and 79 when I started, pretty amazing.
Yeah, it absolutely is. We're talking to the great Mel Kiper, as if you didn't know, and we're talking about the draft, which is still a couple of weeks away. It seems to have been a shift in recent years on the position. Like, it used to be that even if you had a great quarterback coming out, you didn't take him at the top of the draft necessarily. Now it's a quarterback-dominated draft, and we could have, 4 that go in the top 4 picks this year. Is that right?
It's like a feeding frenzy, Andy. It's almost like the next best thing they're looking for. What they have, they find reasons not to like, and they go to the one they don't know much about because it's the next best thing potentially, right?
Yep.
And that's the way it's become with quarterbacks. J.J. McCarthy, I was thinking about this morning. J.J. McCarthy, he was a good quarterback, right? Never had to carry Michigan on his shoulders. Only threw 34 passes in the fourth quarter. Think about that, Andy. All year only threw 34 passes in the fourth quarter and only one touchdown pass. That's pretty amazing. So that was the running game and the defense, right? J.J. said, well, hey, I'm an intangibles guy. You got to love me. I'm an intangibles guy. I won. I compete. I love to play the game. But an intangibles guy. This is where we talk about skill. The rocket arm, Josh Allen. They pass over guys like that. Now you're talking about an intangible guy. When would we ever think an intangibles guy is going number 2, number 5? I think he's going to go 5 in a trade. That's what I'm projecting, a 5th pick overall. The Chargers to trade with Minnesota so they can get J.J. There was some talk about Washington. I think Washington's taking Jaden Daniels. I've said that all along.
Yep. But
the bottom line is J.J. McCarthy says he was an intangibles guy, didn't throw a pass in the second half against Penn State, by the way, late in the year. Could go 5th overall in the draft. That's how the quarterbacks are pushed up and a lot of times overdrafted, Andy.
Yeah, and I remember when I first started working with you at ESPN was 1999, and that was considered to be a quarterback-heavy draft, but there was no rookie salary cap then. And as I remember, Cleveland coming in as an expansion team had the number 1 pick. And the only reason they took Tim Couch is because they thought they could sign him. The others they weren't so sure about, right? Isn't that how things used to work? That they would,
Yeah, a lot of it was, and it was. Remember, I think Matthew Stafford and Sam Bradford got the last huge deals. Remember that monster deal the number 1 pick would get, and then it started to be different after that. But I think when you look back at Couch, and that was McNabb and Culpepper, and I think Cade McNown, and that whole group went that draft. And Achilles Smith, wasn't it? Achilles Smith year?
He was supposed to be number 1, and they couldn't sign him, so they moved on to Couch. It's crazy.
Yeah, and you think about it, they always say, this draft, the 83 draft, Andy, which everybody says, oh, you thought the Trevor Lawrence year was going to be like 83. Well, that draft with Trevor, all those quarterbacks went in the top 15. Now, there were busts in there, right? Trey Lance, obviously, was a bust. And we'll see what happens with Justin Fields, and Mac Jones went there, and obviously Zach Wilson, the big bust there to the Jets at number 2 overall, and Trevor's not yet generational. So they always harp on that, say, no, you told us that was going to be like, it was like 83. But you had all those quarterbacks going to top 15. If you remember 83, Andy, Todd Blackledge was the 2nd quarterback taken. Yeah. Okay? He went 2nd. He went ahead of Jim Kelly and Dan Marino. He was a bust, right? Tony Eason went ahead of Dan Marino. Ken O'Brien went ahead of Dan Marino. So we look at that 83 draft. Yes, 6 quarterbacks, 3 are Hall of Famers, right? John Elway, Jim Kelly, and Dan Marino. But we had some guys that were Todd Blackledge, a bust. Ken O'Brien ahead of Dan Marino, not the right pick there. Tony Eason, even though he went to a Super Bowl, not the right pick. So again, we look at that, 3 out of 6, right? Basically, 3 for 6.
Right. No, and your predecessor, God, YouTube is just so great because these things live in infamy. But when the pick was made for Dan Marino, Dr. Z, Paul Zimmerman, said, clearly the Dolphins don't know what the draft is all about. And so now, we have people like you who study it, but we have people.
I'll give you a Paul Zimmerman story. I get to the draft, Andy, in 1988, I think it was, 1988. And Paul's there, right? It's the day before the draft, and we come down to do our Sports Center, whatever we're doing. I'm walking around, looking at all the I was like to walk around, look at the helmet phones, and walk around. And Paul's there, looking at the set. And I walked in. I had long hair back in those days, right? Yep. He says, "Geez, Mel, what are you, the leader of a rock band?" I was like, the only time I ever heard that one, Andy. He said, he said, "You ever get that hair? You're like a leader of the rock band." So that was Paul. He was a funny guy. And he was great. He did a phenomenal job on the draft of Howard Balzer and George Grand all those years.
Yeah. But before that, there were people who specialized in it. He covered the league, but yes, he did study the draft. And you know what, Mel? You are a rock star. If you no, seriously, you live your life not necessarily in the public. You do most of your work at home and you're on television. But if you got out in the world a lot, and people would, especially this time of year, you try and walk through a shopping mall this time of year. Oh my God, you'd spend all day there. You wouldn't be able to get away from. It
was funny, Eddie. We went to I flew to Kansas City last year, so I get to the airport. I got down to BWI, and I'm waiting around, and it was all the draft. Everybody was going to the draft, so that was fun to talk. I like doing that. We did it at the Zone all these years. Guys would pop into the. Remember we were in our little booth back there, big booth actually, with Dave Sullivan, right? You, me, and Dave.
Yep, those are the days.
People coming in. I remember they all look into there and say, "Who's in there?" And so we had fun. We'd walk around the harbor. Remember, we had a lot of time. I'd be down there from like 7 in the morning till midnight doing all our. That's where I used to do all my ESPN segments. Was from the ESPN Zone. So I'd get down there at 7, 8 in the morning. Wouldn't get home till like 1 in the morning. I'd go over to Barnes and Noble and spend 3 hours reading different books to kill some time in the afternoon, waiting for NFL Live or Sports Center or whatever.
That's crazy. We're talking to Mel Kiper. All right, let's get to, I heard this among the many draft experts that travel through radio and the internet and so forth. One of them said this, and this you may get a kick out of this. He says he's certain that Drake May is going to go number 2 to Washington because they traded Sam Howell to Seattle, and they didn't want to have an awkward situation of having Sam Howell, who played ahead of Drake May at North Carolina, come in and be his backup this year. I mean, what do you make of that kind of speculation?
Interesting analysis there.
Yeah.
I think I don't put much stock in it because I think you go who the best quarterback is. I don't think you worry about schools and things like that. Drake May, if you just look at it, Andy, I was thinking about this yesterday when we were going through quarterbacks. And you had 2 quarterbacks, Caleb Williams, who was phenomenal in 2022, great early in 2023 until he hit some struggles, right, because he didn't have Jordan Addison and had a horrible offensive line in front of him. So he had all those great moments, right? You think about, Jaden Daniels, good in 2022, great, phenomenal in 2023. Drake May this past year in 4 games late in the year was off his game. He was like the pitcher who just didn't have his good stuff. Right. And then you go to JJ. We talk about JJ never having to carry a team. Both those kids, by the way, JJ and Drake are 21. Caleb's 22 and right now, and then you look at Jaden is 23, right? Bo Nix is 24. Michael Penix Jr. soon to be 24. So the young guns are JJ McCarthy and Drake May. But Drake and JJ didn't show that they were that guy this year. JJ kept waiting for JJ to do it, but he never was forced to carry that team. And Drake had those struggles. Even against Virginia, Andy, he was off the mark. NC State, Miami, Clemson. So, again, I think the 2 quarterbacks that played the best and have the most talent are those 2, Caleb and then Jaden. Then Drake has a ton of talent. Jake just needs a year. And I said this, Andy, a long time ago, and Susie Culver, a good friend of all ours, right? Yep. Susie used to say, Mel, you're crazy. It's never happening. Don't even talk about sit, watch, and learn anymore. These guys are playing. Susie was right. Most of these quarterbacks, the best laid plans go awry because they play right away, right? But in the case of Drake May and J.J. McCarthy, they really do need to sit, watch, and learn. Whether they will or not, I don't know, but they do need that 1 year to settle into the NFL.
All right, and I agree that Jaden Daniels will go number 2. I believe in your analysis and other people that I've heard talk about this. But let me just give you a little devil's advocate here on May if they like him. They signed Marcus Mariota. Mariota started 12 games just 2 years ago for the Atlanta Falcons. Also, you got a team that the owner went through the process with his other franchise, the Philadelphia 76ers, a fan base which, if you have an 8-win season, there's cause for celebration. This is a little different situation. I mean, could you see a developmental quarterback coming in here and actually would sit for a year or most of a year while a guy like Mariota plays?
Andy, I never think I have all the answers. I really, nobody's telling anybody who they're saying. That's why we hear Drake May. Yeah, I heard the other day, different people, Jason LaConforna, does radio here, covered the NFL all those years. Others think that, I know Matt Miller, a good friend of ours, works at ESPN, does a great job. He'll be on day 3 with me again this year. Matt does phenomenal work with the NFL draft. Matt's been told by numerous people it's going to be J.J. McCarthy at 2. So, you hear all this, Andy. That's why I don't know. I'm going why Jaden, because that's what I think will happen. Nobody's told me that, right? But you hear other people saying J.J. and Drake. Remember when Baker Mayfield went number 1? I remember I told this story. I walked down. That's why I'm not doing a mock the morning of the draft. It just destroys me for the whole day. And I'm never doing that again. Last year I was up till 3 in the morning. Who cares, right? It's the end of the day. It's ridiculous nonsense is what it is. Bottom line is, Andy, that year, I think I got it right. I'm putting Josh Allen number 1 to Cleveland. Everything's going to fall. I come down to breakfast the draft day morning. My mock's up on ESPN.com, and they informed me. I remember seeing Adam Schefter as soon as I got out of the elevator. I'm taking Baker Mayfield. I'm thinking, are you kidding me? I got on ESPN.com right now. Kiper's final mock has Josh Allen going to the Cleveland Browns. Now you're telling me Baker Mayfield. And it turned out to be, I would have never. Andy, if we'd have talked an hour before that. Well, then I knew, but a day before that draft, and you said, I don't say it. Former walk-on, kind of an overachiever. I like Baker, but go ahead at Josh Allen, who's got everything. So you couldn't have convinced me, Andy, that was going to happen, even though some people knew it was going to happen. So again, I never say never to anything because I don't know who they're taking, but I would be really surprised if it wasn't Jaden Daniels.
And some might say they should have listened to Mel and taken Josh Allen, but it's also where you go. Winding up in Cleveland may be a little bit different than winding up in Buffalo, which is.
I always say, what would happen to Dan Marino if he was going to the middle of the first round of the Detroit Lions instead of James Jones, a fullback out of Florida, and he went to Don Shula and the Dolphins. So you're right, Andy. Where you go, a lot of times determines your fate.
Yeah, exactly. Now, let's talk about why you think Jaden Daniels will be a good fit. We talked on the phone last week, and I mentioned a story that was in the Post about quarterbacks his size. They tend to get hurt. Robert Griffin III being one of them. You say the sample size is too small. 210 is, you think, a good weight for him, and you believe that he can be, successful at that level at his size?
And he used to be probably 170 when he was with Herm Edwards at Arizona State. I mean, he was thin, skinny, and he put weight on gradually. That's why when I talked to his mom, Regina, during the summer leading up to the year when he was deciding to come out or stay, I said, that whole off season there, I said, you got to go back. Jaden needs to go back to LSU for that second year. Joe Burrow came into his own, really hit his stride that second year at LSU after coming from Ohio State. I said he's going to have the receivers. He can do a lot of great things, and she made that decision with Jaden to go back to LSU, and it worked out to go from a fourth-round pick, which is where he would have been when he was making that decision, to the number 2 pick overall. Is amazing, Andy. But no, I think the sample size is small. Alex Smith had played and of course, had that injury. Remember, Joe Theismann had that awful injury. Those things happen, unfortunately, in football, but I think Jaden's now put some weight on. He can evade, elude. He's got to get a little smarter, as they all do. Remember, Josh Allen was taking hits. He still does. We say, Josh, but Josh is 240 pounds, 6'5". I get that, but Josh still had to learn how to get out of bounds. And I'll tell you what, I think he will learn that, and I don't think that's a major concern right now.
And as I tell people getting into this end of the business, the key to interviewing is listening. And I was listening when Mel said that Jaden Daniels' mother called him last year about the draft. So my follow-up question to that is that common? Do prospects' parents call you prior to drafts, or whether they should come out or stay in?
I'll tell you, Andy, sometimes the players do. I talked to Keyshawn Johnson when he was coming out. Key called me. He said, Mel, where you got me? What should I do? I said, Key, I got you in the middle of the first round, maybe as high as 10, whatever. He said, Mel, I got to go to I got to be number one. I said, well, Key, then you got to go back. He went back to being the number 1 pick. I talked to Simeon Rice. When Simeon came out, he wanted to be a top guy. He went back and became a top 5 guy, right? So sometimes players do call you, but in cases of parents and brothers and friends, sure, you get those calls. And I talked to Regina Daniels. Regina was great to talk to. She's a great mom to Jaden, and she asked. I'll tell you what, Andy, she asked all the right questions, and she did her due diligence. And I was on the phone for Regina for hours, and she finally got all the information. And that was before the draft. Said, okay, you got to go back. You're going to be a 3rd, 4th round pick, and 3rd was being generous. I thought more 4th round, and I told her all the things that could possibly happen. And luckily, they fell into place. He won the Johnny Unitas Golden Arm Award, Heisman Trophy. He's going to be the number 2 pick possibly, and it worked out beautifully. And he had a great year at LSU. And by the way, in the 4th quarter, 10 touchdowns, 2 picks, 73% with 3 rushing touchdowns. That's 13 touchdowns, 2 picks, 73%. He needed to do well in the 4th quarter because his defense at LSU was awful. Yeah, and that was the case, obviously, with Caleb Williams, who you still have going number 1. And what I was thinking about, the first draft that I covered was 1990. And it was at the old Marriott Marquis, and I remember walking in. And that was Steve Empton, wasn't it?
No, that was Jeff George, right?
Was this Steve Empton in 1990? I don't remember.
I thought he was 91, but I thought it was
maybe 90. Okay, 91. I remember Steve Empton was one of my major disappointments.
Okay, well,
year that was, Andy.
That was injuries, but here's the thing: I walk in and people are buzzing about, oh, Kiper's got Jeff George. He thinks he's the 89th best prospect. He's out of his mind. And he was taken number one. Colts, in fact, traded up to get the hometown guy. And as it turned out, maybe he wasn't the 89th best prospect, but he had a career that was not as good as it could have been given his arm talent. And it was because of his head and because of other influence in his life. We've heard some things about Caleb Williams. Do you discount those things, or would you look at him in the same way you kind of looked at it with Jeff George years ago?
It's a hard one, Andy. It's a hard one because there were a lot of different things you hear, and I factored in a lot with Jeff George and Caleb Williams. I remember watching him play high school football. Maybe that's because I saw him at Gonzaga and I followed his career very closely. I understand what people are saying. I get it. But, yeah, it's a different world now. Look at NIL, and he's on commercials. He's almost a pro before you're a pro, right? So it's different than it was back then. That was 92, by the way, with Steve Empton, was the 92 draft. But in terms of the 90 draft with Jeff George, I'll tell you another quick story, Andy. Freddie Godelli's producing the draft in 1990. He wanted my top 40 list. Top 40, right? So he could put graphics up for the top 40 players the morning of the draft. I send him the list. He says, Mel, where's Jeff George? I said, he's like 84.
89, as I remember.
It's 89, whatever. You've got a better memory than I do, Andy. So I said, whatever number I gave him, he said, Mel, I can't put up a graphic the morning draft for the number one pick not being on there. I said, well, Freddie, I put him 40. So if you have to put him 40, if you got to put him on there, right?
Yep.
So that's how these things all happen. It's all amazing. I remember all these conversations you have about what we need to do and what's happening and what's going on. But you're right, Jay. It was just a gut feel. Rick Meyer had 33, I believe, the year he came out. And what's it, 93? Was Rick Meyer? I'm not with Bledsoe.
90.
Yeah, I think it was 93.
Yeah, he's same year as Bledsoe. Yeah. Same year.
Yeah, and Bledsoe went 1. And I remember being on the floor of the Marriott Marquis Grand Ballroom. We didn't even know. I didn't have really for sure. And I remember seeing Lee Steinberg said it's going to be Drew. And that was the morning of draft. Got that one right, luckily. But had Rick Meyer 33. And he went number 2. And that's why Lou Holtz said I had a vendetta again't Notre Dame players, which I never did. As you know, I love Notre Dame.
Yeah, you love Jimmy Clausen. One of the great embarrassments of your career.
Yeah, Lou would talk to me. Lou ignored me, would talk to me, tried to get me fired. One time he hated me. So he said I had a vendetta against Notre Dame players, which I never did.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. I could talk to you all day, but let's get to what else is going to happen here. The Commanders obviously need help on the offensive line. They need help in the secondary, and maybe even another receiver. They have 6 picks in the top 100. Let's start on the offensive line. Who do you think might be there after they pick number 2?
Well, I'll tell you what, when you get down to where they're picking early in the second round, I'll tell you a couple offensive linemen out of like Roger Rosengarten out of Washington, played right tackle for 2 years, starter, did a heck of a job. Now, he had the hiccups of the holding, where I always remember that penalty, called back that key play, but that happens, and that was iffy anyway. But Roger Rosengarten, who had a great, really ran 4.92, and I don't really care about that for offensive line, but he's a talented kid. And he had a really good year opposite Troy Fautanu, the left tackle, who's going to go somewhere early to mid-first round. So Rosengarten from Washington and Jordan Morgan. We had him on the Daria and Mel show Saturday, Andy. Great kid. Had an injury 2 years ago, came back from it this year, played really well, got better. He said he wasn't 100% until midway through the season. Jordan Morgan has shorter arms than you prefer for left tackle, which is what he played. So he'll either be a right tackle, more than likely a guard. So he has that versatility to play anywhere. So Rosengarten and Morgan would be good picks at that point. And the receivers, Andy, there's going to be a ton. I have 27 receivers with grade inside the 4th round. So if you need a receiver, you can wait a little bit and hopefully you pick the right one. They're not going to be all great, but if you pick the right one, and a kid I like is Malachi Corley out of Western Kentucky. Great after the catch, and a tough kid, kind of a Debo Samuel type. So there's going to be a ton of receivers go in the first 3 or 4 rounds.
Okay, and then in the secondary, some names that might be available there?
Well, for that pick, I think you're looking at a guy I really like. I think he's the most underrated player in the draft. And you can mark this one down and see how it turns out. You'll say in 3 years, no, you said this guy was underrated. He's a bust. He didn't play. But I really like TJ Tampa from Iowa State. He's a former wide receiver in high school. He was kind of under the radar at Iowa State with the Cyclones, and he had a really good finish to his career. He's got length. He's got ball skills. He's got anticipation and awareness, and he'll tackle. I like TJ Tampa. Kamari Lassiter from Georgia is a nice player. Didn't run great, but he's a really good player. So he's kind of a name to keep it on. And Mikey Sainristil from Michigan is gaining steam. He was a former wide receiver. Jim Harbaugh raved about him. He's a kid to watch. Got it. Max Melton from Rutgers is another one in that general vicinity, Andy. But I'm a big fan of TJ Tampa from Iowa State. And I'll tell you what, if Kool-Aid McKinstry, it's a name, Kool-Aid McKinstry slipped down that far. He ran a 4.48 despite having a Jones fracture. Had a good career at Alabama. Everybody said, hey, he's probably going to run 4.55. He'll be a second-round pick. That's what I was told. That's what I thought. thought maybe he would. Ran 4.48 despite the injury. He's a press corner, tough kid, played a lot of great football for Nick Saban, who loves Kool-Aid McKinstry. If he's there, I think he could be an interesting guy to see about.
Well, we had Clinton Dix here, so why not have a guy named Kool-Aid? That would be one more good name for them. And the last thing is defensive end. Obviously, with Sweat and Young both gone, they may be looking there for a rusher. Any names? Because this is a coach coming in after having Micah Parsons. He's got to have somebody who can rush the passer.
Yeah, Chop Robinson could maybe be there. I have him going in the late first round. Kid out of Penn State who didn't have great sack numbers, Andy, but he had great workout numbers. So he's a guy could maybe be in that mix at that point. But I have him going a little bit earlier than that. Adisa Isaac from Penn State, who played opposite Chop Robinson, doesn't have great workout numbers, but was a really good player. So those are a couple guys there, Andy, I think have a chance to maybe be in the mix. It's not a good year. It is not a year for those types of players.
Wow.
It is a big drop off. A kid I like in the fourth round is Brennan Jackson out of Washington State, but it's not a year for true defensive ends. So Latu Latu is probably going to go in the first round. He's got that neck issue, but he's got a clean bill of health now. He's a really good player, but he'll probably be gone by then. Chris Braswell from Alabama will be more of a late second, third. So it's not a really good year for the edge guys in this draft.
All right, and the last thing is, these people, you work with them over the years. Adam Peters, does he have enough of a track record as an assistant to get an idea as to the kind of drafting he does, or do we now have to see how he does it in the first draft that he has control of?
Well, they always like to go in the train. Think about all the D linemen that were drafted there. It's going to be early, Andy, and of course they made the mistake with Trey Lance, but that was in a year where you didn't have with the COVID a lot of information. So we learned from that. I mean, Trey Lance didn't have a lot of starts. Remember, he only had that one start against Central Arkansas that year, and he actually looked better running than throwing. So maybe because there wasn't enough information on him coming from a lower level of competition. Jaden Daniels at LSU. Jaden Daniels against Alabama. You're going to go the opposite of Trey Lance, right? Jaden Daniels against Alabama in his 2 years at LSU was lights out. Check those numbers out. I don't need to repeat it. Nick Saban, who was the best of all time and one of the best defensive minds of all time, in addition to the greatest head coach ever, couldn't stop Jaden Daniels in 2 years. So it's a big difference with Trey Lance and what he played against and what Jaden Daniels played against and excelled against. So that's why I think maybe he looks at that, Adam Peters, and hey, now I got a guy in the SEC for Alabama, did it at Arizona State. Herm Edwards compares Jaden Daniels to Randall Cunningham. Others say Lamar Jackson. Why not?
Okay. Well, Mel, it is a great pleasure to talk to you. I will rely on you for draft advice, but when you become a grandfather this summer, feel free to consult with me.
Always, Andy. I believe you'll be getting a few calls on that one, pal.
Absolutely. Hey, best of luck with the draft this year, and we'll catch up soon. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks, Andy. You're the best. Thanks, Andy. See you, pal.
Take care. That's the great Mel Kiper. Thanks very much to Mel Kiper for coming on. Just love talking to him, and it's always great to catch up before the draft. And if you missed it again, it's at ESPN630DC.com. Thanks to Rex Minturn for running the show. Thanks to all of you who listen. Tony is up next, and I'll see you back here tomorrow at 9 a.m.